many of the clients who start investing in property, often the way they start is by inheriting a property. You've got to think about the location, you've got to think about the size of the property, the type of tenants you could attract to that property. Would it work as an investment property or not? If you put the property on the market to sell, you need to think about what price are you realistically going to achieve from the sale of the property. Maybe you could refinance it and that will give you the money to do the property up. And maybe there are some siblings, some family members who don't want to hold the property. It obviously needed some modernization and he'd had the idea of maybe renting the property out to get a rental income in. You've got to think about how do you use the property? Do you sell it? Do you move into it to live there or do you rent it out? And also you need to think about, how can you protect this money? Because what should you do with an inherited property? This is often a question I'm asked, and that's why I want to talk about it in this episode of the Property Magic Podcast. Hello, my name's Simon Zutshi. I've been investing in property for 30 years, teaching people like you how to become successful investors for the last 22 years. And many of the clients who start investing in property, often the way they start is by inheriting a property. And sometimes they turn that inherited property into a rental property, or sometimes they sell that property and take the money to reinvest in rentals they want to hold for the long term. So whenever you inherit a property, there are a number of considerations, and that's what we're going to talk about on this episode of the Property Magic Podcast. The first thing to think about is, who are the beneficiaries of the inherited property? If it's just you, it makes it much easier because you can decide what you want to do with the property. If there are other beneficiaries, maybe other siblings, brothers and sisters, well, obviously you need to take the consideration of everyone into account. And different family members might have different requirements. Some people might urgently need the money from the inheritance to clear some other debt or for some other investment. Some people may not need the money and are happy to leave it in the property. So there are really three things you can do with an inherited property. One, you might decide to just sell the property. Two, you could decide to move into the property and live there yourself as your own home. Or number three, you could turn it into a rental property. Let's look at all of these considerations. If you put the property on the market to sell, you need to think about what price are you realistically going to achieve from the sale of the property. And that kind of depends on the condition of the property. If you've had a family member living there, maybe they've lived there for the last 20, 30 years, it's pretty likely that property will need some modernization and improvement. The question is, do you modernize it yourself, spend the money, but maybe raise the value and increase the amount you're going to make from the property sale? Or do you just sell it to someone else who's going to go in, they want to do the renovation themselves, put their own stamp on it? You've got to make that decision. And again, you've got to agree that with the other siblings. Now, let's assume you decided not to sell the property, you're going to retain it. There are two things you can do. Now, you could either move into the property, and sometimes people want to do that. It's maybe an emotional connection for them. Maybe the property's been in the family a long time and they really don't want to sell it and they've always wanted to live there and they move into the property. Now, if there's no mortgage at all, that's nice and easy. But if there's a mortgage on the property, or if there are siblings who need paying out, because not all siblings might want to move in together, you might have one who wants to move in, the others want to get their money. What you might need to do is raise a mortgage on that residential property. And of course, when you're raising a mortgage on somewhere you're going to live, your personal income will come into account. The lender wants to make sure that you can afford to pay the mortgage. So they're going to look at how much you earn, what the repayments might be. And you may or may not be able to get a high enough mortgage in order to pay the other siblings the amount they should get from the inheritance. The other thing you could do, though, is the third option. You could take the property and you could rent it out to some tenants. Now, by the way, when you inherit a property, it might well be an investment property anyway that's already tenanted and you could just continue to rent that property. One thing you might want to think about if you inherit an tenanted property is very often the previous owner who's left this property to you, maybe they haven't raised the rents as much as they could. Maybe they haven't modernized the property as much as they could. And whenever we buy a property from an existing landlord, this is often the case. So when you take a property on, don't just assume you're getting the maximum rent, it's in great condition. It might be worth you spending a little bit of money on that property to improve the standards and then also raise the rent. Now you might have the money to do that, or you could actually refinance that property. And I remember meeting someone who's now a very good friend of mine. I met him years and years ago at an event. It was a business event, not a property event. And then about 10 years later, he saw me speaking at a property event, came up to me, reminded me we'd been at the same event. I did actually remember him. And he shared the story where he had inherited a property from his father. Now, it was his father's home. It obviously needed some modernization. And he'd had the idea of maybe renting the property out to get a rental income in. But this gentleman shared with me that he had been renovating the house himself for a year. He had been using his evenings and weekends to do a little bit of work, get some friends who are some trades to come in and do some work. And it's taken a long time to get this property ready to rent. And I said to him, why don't you just remortgage the property? He said, oh no, I can't do that. I've already got a residential mortgage. And he didn't realize that you can have one residential mortgage, you can have as many buy-to-let mortgages as you want. He was thinking he'd have to get another residential mortgage. Now, this guy's not stupid, he's not dumb, he's a clever guy, but the challenge is no one ever teaches anyone about property investing. He didn't know that you could have lots and lots of investment mortgages. If he'd have known that, he could have simply refinanced the property. That would have given him the money to get a professional to do the refurbishment instead of trying to do it himself. Now, that would have cost him more money, but obviously he could have got the property rented much quicker than the year it took him to do the refurbishment. So although he would have paid someone else to do the work, he would have had a rental income much quicker, and in fact, overall, he would have made more money than trying to do it himself. He just didn't know he could refinance that property. So if you've inherited a property you want to rent out, maybe you could refinance it, and that will give you the money to do the property up. And maybe there are some siblings, some family members who don't want to hold the property, they just want to get their money. That's a way of getting the money to pay to them. Now, let's say there were 4 family members who are going to inherit this money from this property. And let's say only one of them actually wants to keep the property, i.e. you, because you understand the value about renting properties out. Well, if a property is, let's say, worth £300,000 and you could get a buy-to-let mortgage of £225,000, you're getting 75% loan to value because it's not based on your income, unlike the residential property where you live, it's based on your income. This rental property is based on the potential rental income from the property. So if maybe some of the siblings want to keep the property, some want to sell, rather than selling, you can just refinance, and that refinance gives you the money to pay to the people who want to get out and go off and do whatever they want to do with the cash. So please don't think that when you have a property you've inherited, it has to be sold in order for people to get their payout. That's not necessarily the case. Maybe it's suitable to hold as a rental property. But that brings up a whole new question. Let's assume you wanted to buy investment properties to give you a rental income and also benefit from the long-term capital growth. Would you buy this particular property? Now, you've got to think about the location, you've got to think about the size of the property, the type of tenants you could attract to that property. Would it work as an investment property or not? And many investment properties are made from inherited properties, but some properties that are inherited, they're just not suitable. It's the wrong kind of location, the wrong kind of property, and it doesn't really stack up. And actually, it would be better to sell that property and then take the money to reinvest in a much better investment property. So when you inherit a property, there are quite a few things to think about. You've got to think about all the people who are benefiting from that inheritance. You've got to think about how do you use the property? Do you sell it? Do you move into it to live there? Or do you rent it out? And also you need to think about, how can you protect this money? Because if you've had this gift, this valuable gift from maybe parents or uncles and aunties, and they're giving it to you, you want to make sure you can protect that money for future generations so that you can give a legacy to your kids and your grandkids and really look after the family bloodline. So it's important to make sure you're thinking carefully about these decisions and maybe get a bit of help, get a bit of guidance, or maybe make sure you've got some education. Because unfortunately, no one ever teaches us about property investing, or they don't even teach us about money in school. We learn about getting a job, and that's pretty much where it ends. But really, if we want to be a successful investor, we need to educate ourselves. And obviously, that's something we can do by watching the YouTube videos here. We have a network all over the UK. If you want to learn about successful investing, it's called the Property Investors Network. You can go to your local PIN meeting. There were 45 around the UK. There are a couple of the Netherlands as well. And if you go to www.pinmeeting.co.uk, there'll be a link in the show notes and below this video. You can see all the meetings listed by date order. You can find your local meeting. It's £25 to attend a meeting, which is a very small investment given the contacts you're going to make, given the belief you're going to gain and the knowledge you can gain from those meetings. But if you've never been to a meeting before, you can simply use the word podcast, use that as a voucher code. So when you come to the payment page on pinmeeting.co.uk, instead of paying, just click where it says voucher code and use that word, and you'll bypass the payment page. You can come to your very first PIN meeting as my guest, completely free of charge, just to come and see what you've been missing out on. So PIN meetings is a great place to start if you've not done a PIN meeting yet. And finally, if you want to speed up your learning, there's lots of courses and training you can do. And if you've got this valuable gift of the inheritance, you want to make sure you make the most of it. So what you could do is book a call with one of my team to talk about your requirements, and they could find the specific training that might help you achieve your property investing goals. So there'll be a link in the show notes you can click and come and book a call with one of the team, and they'll give you a complimentary strategy session to work out how you can make the most of this valuable inheritance gift that you've been given. I do hope this video has helped you. I hope you've been inspired. Investing in property is one of the very best investments you can make. And I believe this is such a great time to be investing. You should use that inheritance to build the wealth of your future generations and pass on the gift just in the same way that it's a valuable gift has been made to you. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit the bell icon so you get notified anytime a brand new video comes out. This Property Magic podcast comes out every Tuesday, and sometimes I'm sharing information, sometimes I'm interviewing successful investors, but it's going to help inspire you and help you become a more successful investor. Until the next episode, I encourage you to invest with knowledge, invest with skill.